Hey everyone, so today we're going to talk about a momentous era in Western civilization, and that is going to be the Renaissance. Unit, like we've talked about, we're going to be studying innovation, and innovation can come in a number of different forms, as we'll talk about throughout. But in terms of the Renaissance, this was really a chance for a new start for Europe. Renaissance means rebirth in French, and it was a period of renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman ideas in art, science, and literature, which are going to inspire countless new innovations to occur within Europe. It's going to begin in Italy in the 1300s and spread across Europe by the 1500s. And so much of what we think about in terms of the classics in art and science and politics and culture and things that are going to spur on new ideas like the Enlightenment are going to come out of this era of the Renaissance. So, in terms of just giving a little bit of backstory, to this point within Europe, you have this massive economic system that is taking place known as feudalism. And we've mentioned feudalism at certain points throughout the year, but feudalism was a political and social system in medieval Europe, so the time period just before the Renaissance, where kings would grant land to nobles in exchange for loyalty and military service. So what we sort of think of with like the knights and those sorts of people and nobles that would sort of serve the king, with the peasants doing so much of the work at the bottom. So peasants would work the land for the lords in exchange for protection, and it sort of created this really rigid class structure where peasants really couldn't rise above where they were at. And so there is limited social mobility. Peasants couldn't become knights. Knights rarely became nobles. Nobles rarely became kings. Everyone was sort of at their station in life throughout. And also at this time, this is the period before the Reformation, where intellectual life was largely controlled by the Catholic Church. And so change and creativity were not widely encouraged. And so you have Europe going through this period of the Middle Ages in which there isn't a lot of innovation happening. And you have this rigidity within social cultures. However, things are going to change in 1346 with the Black Death, which was a massive pandemic that hit Europe. And after the Black Death, you're going to see a huge change because unfortunately 1/3 of the people of Europe end up dying. And so because of that, labor is in short supply. And so these peasants are going to demand better pay and better rights. And unfortunately, even though it caused a lot of death and destruction, the Black Death also did allow for sort of a shift in society and changes to happen in society to allow for some of this social mobility to take place. And so feudal lords ended up losing power, even though feudalism would certainly continue on in some form in a lot of different places, while towns and cities ended up growing as centers of trade and wealth. So you're sort of moving away from some people living on farms and more towns and cities rising up as well. And so with the rising wealth from this era came a new middle class. And this included merchants who would sell things, as well as bankers who sort of made money by giving out money, storing money, sort of handling finances. And these people would become patrons. And when we're thinking about the Renaissance, the word patron is something that's really, really important because a patron is someone who is sort of funding this sort of art. And so because of that, cities like Florence and Venice, which had a lot of these new merchants and bankers, ended up becoming hubs for innovation and artistic activity because the way that these merchants and bankers would sort of show their power, show their wealth, is to pay people to make art for them. And so we're going to see people like Da Vinci or Michelangelo or Raphael sort of rise up out of this era because of that. Now, in terms of thinking about the power of the Catholic Church during this rebirth, you have a declining authority of the Church in the late Middle Ages and during the Renaissance. So by the 14th and 15th century, the Catholic Church had already begun to lose credibility and power due to those internal crises and external criticisms that we talked about with the Reformation. But there's other events going on as well. So for one, you have the Babylonian captivity, which is taking place in the 14th century. This is when the papacy, or the Pope, moved to France and appeared to be under the influence of the French monarchy. And this sort of damages the church's reputation as a spiritual authority, because if they're under the authority of a man-made thing like the French monarchy, then how can they be giving out, spiritual advice? But then you also have the Great Schism, which ends up taking place in the late 14th century and early 15th century. And this is when multiple popes claimed leadership of the church at the same time. And what this resulted in is sort of a fracturing in some small ways of the church and some political infighting. And so that's also going to continue to make the church seem corrupt and divided. And so among all of this corruption and criticism, many clergy, end up living in these luxurious ways and engaging in political affairs rather than dedicating their time to fulfilling spiritual duties. You also have the selling of indulgences, which we talked about, where they would pay for, people would pay in exchange for the forgiveness of sins. You have simony taking place, where you're selling off church offices, nepotism, where you're giving posts to relatives. All of these are signs that there is a deep corruption. And at the same time, the wealth and the power of the Catholic Church is also going towards some of these artists as well. And so you see a funding of art come even from the Catholic Church. And so popes like Pope Leo X end up spending enormous sums of money on art and architecture, including rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica, which is the major cathedral within Rome and within Vatican City in Rome. So in terms of thinking about this as well, this is also going to lead to a rise of literacy, humanism, and questioning authority. So with the growth of Renaissance humanism, more people begin to study classical texts and develop critical thinking skills. And this made them more likely to question church teachings and authority. And when we're thinking about humanism, humanism is a very important concept. Humanism refers to anything that is man-made. And so before the Renaissance, you sort of have this thinking that everything is directed by God. But during the Renaissance, people became more interested not just in terms of like what God is directing us to do, but also in terms of like what humans are in control of here on earth. And so this made them more likely, as they're questioning, what are humans actually doing? It made them more likely to question church teachings and authority. But you also have the invention of the printing press, and this is going to lead, like we've talked about before, to a huge revolution in the making of books, including the Bible in local languages. And this is giving ordinary people direct access to Scripture, and this is sort of undermining the church's role as the sole interpreter of religious truth. And so all of this is signaling a greater shift towards sort of secular power, those non-religious forms of power. And so the growth during this time, especially during the Reformation, of these stronger monarchies, and in terms of the growth of city-states like Florence and Venice across Italy, or what we know of as Italy today, and across Europe, this is also reducing the church's power and political control. And so leaders in this area are really, showing off that power by, again, funding the arts, funding civic pride in the cities that these people live in, and they are, pushing this over church and religious dogma. So in terms of thinking about humanism and secularism, I sort of talked about humanism just a second ago, but it did again emphasize this individual potential, this potential that is outside of just what God is directing us to do. And so individual potential, education, the study of classical texts, and that is over supernatural or spiritual powers controlling the lives of humans. But you also have secularism as another concept that's hugely important to the spread of the Renaissance. And this is encouraging a focus on worldly topics rather than just religious ones. And it's shifting attention away from, again, like the practices of religion and towards creativity, exploration, figuring out what else maybe we don't know about life here on Earth, as well as the rediscovery of lost knowledge from societies like the Greeks and the Romans. And so all of this is leading to a lot of study. Now, a couple key thinkers that are going to be key to sort of kicking off this Renaissance. You have Petrarch, who is called the father of humanism, as it says up there. And he ended up collecting and preserving ancient manuscripts from cultures like the Greeks or the Romans. And then you also have Erasmus as well. And this was a Dutch scholar who promoted critical thinking, satire, religious reform, while emphasizing education. So again, pushing people towards individually learning the truth and doing the things necessary in order to move society forward and civilization forward. Now, in terms of thinking about why the Renaissance began in Italy, because we talked about that at the beginning of this particular video, Italy was incredibly wealthy. And it was incredibly wealthy because it was at the forefront in Europe of several different trade routes. It was wealthy from Mediterranean trade and banking because it's on the Mediterranean Sea. And so you have city-states like Florence and Venice and Milan, all of which are becoming wealthy from this trade, from this banking, and they are competing to fund art and architecture and to show off the power that they have through these beautiful works of art and buildings. Now, located on the top of ancient Roman ruins, which was, Rome in Italy was the seat of the Roman Empire, but also other areas of Italy, Italy was perfectly placed for the rediscovery of those classical works, some of which had existed within Italy, but because of its center in trade, they could also get other teachings from other places. And so you have sort of two things going on here, where you have a largely urbanized society where a lot of people are living in the city and are talking with each other and building up that knowledge, but you also have them being involved with money-making prosperity. And so this is going to lead to a literate, so people who could read, elite class who valued culture and learning as well. Now, a couple other key factors that ended up causing this Renaissance innovation. One is the rediscovery of those classical Greek and Roman texts. So in 1453, Constantinople, which we know today as Istanbul, Turkey, a city right on the border between Europe and the Middle East, after they fell to the Ottoman Turks, which was a Middle Eastern or Arab society. And many of these Greek scholars ended up fleeing to Italy with the ancient texts that were housed in Constantinople, which had been the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. And Islamic scholars who were moving into Constantinople had long preserved and translated Greek and Roman works into Arabic earlier on in history. And so these works were now translated into Latin or other local languages as they're being brought back into Europe from Constantinople. And it's spreading these ancient ideas of logic and balance and human potential that were so popular, 1500 or 2000 years before the Renaissance. But you also have political competition that's going on between these powers as well. And this competition is breeding more and more innovation as these different city-states try to culturally and economically outdo each other. And so you have these powerful families like the Gonzagas, the Medici, the Sforzas. All of these people are acting as patrons and funding this art to prove their sophistication and power, and to show their city as the most important one. And so this is meaning that innovation is being rewarded and showcased in ways that were not happening when the Catholic Church was the sole dominator of authority within society. But you also have technology that's sparking creativity, and this is brought about by this competition. But in terms of engineering, you have many works of architecture and other engineering feats that are going on. And this is allowing for massive structures like the Florence Cathedral, the Duomo, works of art and architecture like St. Peter's Basilica being rebuilt. And you also have new innovations in navigation, like improved maps and compasses and ship designs that is fueling exploration and is going to continue to lead to people discovering new ideas that were not in Europe before, and other things that are going to spur on innovation. And you also have technologies that are developed for trade and war that were also being adapted to be used in art and scientific uses. So the drawings you have below here are from a very famous artist, Leonardo da Vinci, who is also an inventor, an engineer, all of these things during the Renaissance as well. Now, like I said, the printing press, something we've talked about here in class, is also going to be extremely important. And this is going to be invented by Johannes Gutenberg in 1440. It did allow these books, which have these ideas, to be printed quickly and cheaply. And so knowledge is really spreading rapidly, and it's allowing for the spread of these Renaissance, these new ideas to be spread as well. And it is also encouraging a lot of different people to read and write and be educated. And so this is empowering all these different people, like reformers who want to change things, like humanists who want to focus on human prosperity and human controlled avenues here on Earth, to challenge authority, to share ideas across borders, and to continue this innovation going in more and more ways. You also have a lot of different advances in art and architecture during this time as well. You have artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci are both from Florence within Italy. They're sort of born at the epicenter of this Renaissance that is going on. And those two, along with Raphael, are going to master perspective and showing off the human anatomy and realism, all of which are going to be creating, beautiful works of art that had been unseen in Europe since the Greeks and the Romans, and we're surpassing it as well. And they're doing this by borrowing from classical teachings and things like architectures having columns and arches and domes from Roman buildings, and then bringing it into art as well. Because art is becoming no longer just religious. If you look at the Middle Ages, all of the art was, reflective of religion. And although there's a lot of art within the Renaissance that is religiously based, like we can see La Pieta from Michelangelo here below, it's starting to also reflect daily life, the human form. And this is becoming much more natural of the human body, even if it is still religiously based a lot of times. Another thing that's happening is that these artists are becoming huge celebrities, and they're becoming intellectuals in their own right. They're some of the most valued people within society, including people like Leonardo da Vinci, who's a genius. And so even though he does not paint a ton, he has very few works of art. Things like the Last Supper, the Mona Lisa, these live on because of his genius. But you also have Michelangelo, who did the Statue of David. He painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling in Rome. And all of this celebrated the human form. And then we also have Raphael, who is another famous painter of this time. He painted something called the School of Athens, which we had on a couple slides ago, in which he painted all of the geniuses of the Greek, Roman, and Renaissance time, just sort of tying those in together once again. Now, art is not the only thing that was valued or was changing during this time. You also have science and inquiry changes as well. So Renaissance thinkers are also challenging medieval science through experimentation and observation. And so you have people like Leonardo da Vinci, once again, who are studying anatomy, studying flight, studying mechanics, and bringing that into their art. But you also have people like Copernicus, who is not an artist, but he proposed a heliocentric or sun-centered universe, which again is breaking away from religious traditions, which had said that the Earth, created by God, was the center of the universe. And so all of this is laying a foundation for the scientific revolution, which we'll be learning about here in class. We have a revival of philosophy and humanism. So thinking about Greek and Roman philosophy and all of the geniuses of the classic Roman and Greek age, like Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. All of these people are brought back into popular culture at this time. And all of this is leading to a sort of civic humanism, which is encouraging citizens to engage in public life, to improve their communities, to not feel like they have no power over what happens within society. And this is going to lead to some of the things that we see with the Enlightenment in the next couple of hundred years. Now, in terms of politics and power, Renaissance politics really shifted away from some of the medieval ideals of just chivalry, where you have these knights that are protecting this king that's been chosen by divine right by God, and into more pragmatic and secular approaches to leadership that is separated from religion. Now, obviously, with the age of absolutism, we'll see a return to some of these ideas, but you start to see people in the Renaissance start to think, what really makes a strong ruler or a good ruler? And so one particularly influential person during this time is a man named Niccolo Machiavelli. He is from Florence, and he writes a book called The Prince in 1513. And this was incredibly groundbreaking in terms of thinking about politics. And he argues not that leaders should be sort of soft and allow their people to have rights, but he argued that effective rulers should prioritize stability and power over just morality. And morality would be doing things that are moral or ethically right. And so he advised leaders to be feared rather than loved if they could not be both. So again, just stability at all costs. And it sort of reflected the political instability of some of the Italian city-states. Even though we have this rebirth going on, there's a lot of competition going on, and it's leading to a lot of different war between cities like Florence, Venice, Milan, Rome. And this is leading to, instability within society. And so in order to bring that stability back, Niccolo Machiavelli thinks that these leaders should be tougher. In city-states like Florence and Venice and Milan, these all operated as independent powers, and they were oftentimes ruled by wealthy merchant families or despots, right? Tyrants, authoritarians. And so these city-states ended up competing with one another economically and artistically and militarily. And this is going to lead to both innovation and also conflict as well. And one of those families that really led some of these places were people like the Medicis. And they ended up sponsoring artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci. And this is a way to sort of show off their power, to legitimize their rule, and to increase their cultural prestige, which blended politics and arts together. Now you also have secular rulers across Europe who begin also funding public works, universities, artists, all of which are going to contribute to education for the masses, but are also about showing off their own power. Now, in terms of education and literacy, we've talked about this before, but you do see a rise of things being printed in vernacular language, so the local language. So things like Italian, French, and German instead of just being in Latin. This leads to an incredible access to books that is expanding after the invention of the printing press like we talked about. And so with that, more people can read, more people want to go to school, and this is going to lead to more universities and a further spread of these Renaissance ideas to continue going. And so more people are receiving formal education, more people are learning to read, and this is overall benefiting humankind. Now you also have, because of this, because more books are being printed, more achievements in literature. So you have Dante, who created something called the Divine Comedy. He blended sort of medieval and classical ideas into this Renaissance form. But we also have Petrarch. This was poetry that focused on emotion and human experience, sort of that humanist side. Erasmus, he sort of satired or made fun of religion in a way, but called for religious reform. And then people like Christine de Pizan, a early feminist who defended women's intellect and morality, and then Niccolo Machiavelli, as we talked about. Now, as time goes on, we start to see the Renaissance spread out of Italy, and it starts to spread north into places like modern-day Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire at the time, England, France, Belgium, the Netherlands. All of this is going to lead to the Renaissance becoming slightly different in these areas, but also a huge amount of innovation throughout Europe. And this movement north was really influenced by increased trade and travel. And, as people are innovating, this is allowing these ideas to spread even faster because technology is growing as well. And so the invention of the printing press, the better ship making and shipbuilding and navigation, this is all leading to these ideas getting throughout Europe. But there's a different focus in the north. Unlike the Italian Renaissance, which often celebrated those sort of classical Greece and Roman Empire art and human beauty and secular themes, the Northern Renaissance did place a greater value and emphasis on Christian values. And especially, as the Reformation becomes more widely spread throughout Northern Europe, you have some of these new Protestant ideals sort of coming to the forefront. And then you also have this religious humanism emerging, where scholars are applying these humanist methods like critical thinking and analyzing texts to early Christian texts and the Bible to sort of blend those two things together, and becoming a pure original Christian teaching that would be closer to what Martin Luther was talking about in the Renaissance. A couple major figures, as well as some of their critiques. You have Erasmus as well as Thomas More, who are both sort of arguing from different sides of the coin. Erasmus was Dutch, More was English, and sort of arguing for greater amounts of reason that is going to help to get rid of some of the inequality of European society at the time. And all of this is leading to laying the intellectual groundwork for the Protestant Reformation to spread and continue. And these northern humanists are believing that by educating people and reforming the church, society could improve. And so they're already thinking about some of these things, but they can continue to add to them with the Renaissance. All right, well, at this point, we'll continue talking about the Renaissance throughout this unit. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Have a great day.